Da bawb, croeso mawr I chi at ein sesiwn dros frecwas bore yma. Croeso mawr I chi gyd fel arfer. Morning, everybody. My name is John Parry-Jones, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our breakfast briefing this morning. This is probably the biggest audience we've had here, I think, since pre-COVID. I think it's a testament or an indication of the interest that there is in this topic this morning. We even had people at about 7:30 knocking on the door of the business school trying to come in. So it's been nice to see such a big crowd here and a big crowd online as well. So you're all very welcome. It's a great pleasure for me today to be able to welcome Derek and Alice from the Future Generations Commissioner's Office. Really delighted, Derek, that we were able to set a date for this eventually. It did take a little bit of toing and froing, but we managed to set a date, which was great. Really looking forward to hearing from you and hearing you share your visions and your thoughts for the future. I'm also very grateful to Dr. Julie Gwilliam, who is joining us as well from the School of Architecture here in the university, who's going to host, she'll introduce Derek more formally than I have, and will chair the Q&A that will take place at the end of the session. Now, before I hand over to Julie, I just, as I always do at this point, just wanted to draw your attention to some of the events that we've got taking place here in the business school over the course of the next month or so. Our very own Professor Leighton Andrews has written a book. He's just published a book, and we're hosting a launch night in the Glamorgan building, which is about a mile or so towards town from here. Leighton is going to be joined by Sir Peter Riddell, who is a former journalist with the Financial Times. So if you do want to join Leighton, just to hear some of the background to his research into that book, and to hear from Peter as well, do get in touch with us. There is a registration page for that event as well. Next month's breakfast briefing, it's going to be something slightly different, I think. Mike and Cara Reid, who are academics here in the business school, are going to join us to discuss the research that they have looked into in relation to experts and expert hour. I think it relates, or it triggered from perhaps COVID and the amount that we were dependent on the likes of Chris Whitty and the expertise that those guys brought into play. But in many respects, that polarized opinion as well. Lots of people had views that differed from theirs. So Mike and Cara are going to delve into that. They're also going to bring it down to what it means to us as a business, from a business point of view, from a local business point of view, the implications for you as businesses using experts to guide you and to give you information to be able to plan for the future. And also perhaps very importantly from an SME perspective, the use of consultants and where they fit into the plan moving forward. And I think they're also going to touch on, from an expert's point of view, what is the future for experts with AI and technology taking a greater place in everybody's lives these days. Then the role of the consultant and the expert may diminish. So it's going to be a different type of presentation, but really interesting. I'm already looking forward to that one. And just a nod to our Lean Six Sigma program, which begins at the start of May with Professor Manish Kumar. Just a reminder, I think there's a misconception that Six Sigma, continuous improvement, and all of those things relate specifically or primarily to manufacturing processes and supply chains and things like that. It doesn't. Most of the people who attend our courses here tend to be office-based and administration-based, and they gain as much from those tools as anybody else. So don't overlook the fact that it may be something, a course like that may be useful for you or somebody within your team. We are delighted that we're able to relaunch. We're relaunching our part-time MBA in September of this year. Part-time MBA is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a program that can be studied while you're still working full-time. So it's a great opportunity if somebody wants to extend or enhance their qualifications to do it while they're still in full-time employment. So if you are interested, Salome's details are there, but just come through one of the team here if you'd like further information about that. Finally, before I hand over to Julie, just a reminder that this morning's event is being recorded. And also, if you have any questions for Derek, we're hoping to open up for quite a lengthy Q&A session, because I think there may be quite a bit of interest and there may be some questions that come out of this morning. If you have questions, if you're online this morning, if you can pop your questions into the chat box, then Angharad will liaise with you in relation to how we pose the question on your behalf. If you're here in the suite with us this morning, if you just raise your hand, Julie will try and sort of switch between online questions and questions here in the suite. if Julie asks you here in the suite to pose a question, if you can wait until I bring you a microphone so that the people at home can hear the question when it's asked. Other than that, Julie, I'm going to leave it with you. Thank you.
Hopefully my microphone's working. So Derek has joined us this morning. It's a really exciting moment for the university to have this opportunity to hear about Derek's new strategy in post for about a year, I think, and with Cymru Can launched in November. It's really about ensuring that everybody in Wales understands how on earth we can all work together to make sure that we make Wales a great place for us, for our future and for the future generations, a little bit in the title of your role, hey? So today I think Derek and Alice Vaughan is here to really explore what Cymru Can means for the business community. And I think it's an introduction to the strategy through that lens. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Derek and Alice.
Yeah, well, thank you. Can I move this as I've got a mic and we can swing that back around. Well, diolch yn fawr, thank you very much. Bore da pawb. Thank you very much for inviting me to come along today. The focus, as you've heard of the conversation today, is very much about how we might do a better job of engaging businesses in the work of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So we're hoping to have plenty of time for conversation and discussion about how that might work. I was involved in a hackathon recently with SMEs to have a discussion about just this subject. And I've been to many hackathons. My previous organization used to organize them all the time. And we had about 8 or 9 tables, and they all came up with the same idea. So let's see if you think that's a good idea and you come up with the same idea as one of the ways in which we could involve businesses. I've been joined by my colleague Alice. Do you want to stand up, Alice, so you can be seen? Alice is going to join with me and deliver some of the presentation here this morning as well. I've been in the job just a year, and just almost exactly a year. 1st of March is when I've started, and it is staggering how much interest there is in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I've been slightly overwhelmed by the level of interest both in Wales and around the world in our legislation, because it's a world first. And many forgive me, some of you already know this stuff, but it is a world first, and something we can be really proud of. We're the only country to have legislated for the Sustainable Development Goals and to put them into law, obliging our public bodies, our public sector organisations to deliver on the SDGs. We're the only country with a Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, my job, and there are other countries looking at that too. So it does give us a fair amount of soft power around the world and an interest in this. The First Minister is actually on record of saying, you know, after rugby and perhaps football, people ask him about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is kind of crazy in many respects, but interesting nonetheless. But of course, that only matters if this is making a difference for people today and tomorrow. And that is where I've got to in the job, effectively. We did a big review process. Alice was closely involved in that to understand where we are in delivering against the ambitions of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And it's safe to say we've seen some good progress in several areas, which I'll come on to a little bit later. But we've certainly got a job to do in matching our ambition. There's an implementation gap in terms of delivery of the Wellbeing Future Generations gap, and it's my job to support public bodies and others to close that gap. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to give you a brief sort of introduction to why we've got this legislation for those of you that are not fully aware of it. Some information about what the legislation does and how it applies. And then I'm going to talk a bit about my approach to the role and the Cymru Can strategy, as we've just been hearing about, and what we want to focus on, and then go on to talk about how that might deliver for businesses and with businesses in Wales. But let me not go on too long, because I could probably take the full hour covering that ground, and I think we would much rather, if you would be happy with that, for us to have a good amount of time for discussion and conversation about all of this. Okay, so I'm in charge of the clicker. Sorry, that's my job. Great, that's me. That's Alice. That's the title of the presentation, and so this is effectively what it's all about. So. It's about delivering on the Sustainable Development Principle. It's acting in a manner which seeks to ensure that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Crucially, this is about today and tomorrow, as we use in our taglines. So some of the pushback you'll get around this agenda is, we've got real needs now. How can we be sacrificing the needs of people today, whilst also meeting the needs of people tomorrow? But it's about doing that for both. We're meeting today's needs and meeting the needs of people tomorrow. It's crucial that we do that for all sorts of reasons. But we know if we continue to look at short-term solutions, then we're storing up problems for the future. We have a duty and a responsibility to future generations to be acting now for their interests. Otherwise, those issues will just get worse. So I think this slide just sort of sums up. If you think about this in a democratic sense, in a numbers game, this looks at the number of people who've previously lived, the number of people in the last 50,000 years, the number of people alive today, and the number of people yet to come. And you can see, we owe it to that huge number of people yet to be born to act in their interests. It's about a number of things, I guess. It's about dealing with those big issues of our time. So this is about addressing climate change, nature loss, some of the health situation that we're facing, the crisis of obesity levels and diabetes levels. So it's about dealing with those big issues of our time. And we know if we don't deal with them in good order, then they become much more expensive and more difficult to deal with. But it's also about shaping a positive future for our society. It's having some agency, I guess, about where we want to go as a country. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act sets a direction. It sets long-term goals for our country, which I'll come on to later on. And it allows us to think about, how we're going to get there and to plan to get there. Not many countries have that long-term vision and are seeking to shape that long-term future. I think often when we're talking about change, and we've seen some kickback in Wales around some of the important change that's being implemented by Welsh Government in terms of farming, for example, in terms of road policy, we are seeing people worried about change, concerned about change. But in my view, obviously change is inevitable, but change and the future doesn't need to be negative. We're working towards a positive future, and we're trying to shape that future rather than one that's more negative. So it's going to be different. It's essentially, of course, it's going to be different, but it doesn't need to be one that's more negative than the one we have now. I think there's lots of public support for this agenda. So as I've mentioned, the pushback that we often get around the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is about not doing things in the interests of people today, or other pushback is we just don't have we don't have the money for this agenda, or people want us to be doing different things. But my experience is very different from that. My experience is that people are fed up with short-term solutions. They're fed up with sticking plaster solutions. They're fed up with politicians, policymakers and leaders just thinking ahead to the next election. They want longer term approaches, and they want politicians to be committing to a longer term agenda. So I sense, and we get in our office a lot of public support for this agenda. And that's what I use to challenge public bodies when they say sometimes this kind of work is too difficult. Just where I was brought up, there was a new hospital built very recently, and within months of it being open, they were having to extend that hospital because it hadn't been built to take account of the needs of the population then, let alone years ahead. And it's that kind of short-term thinking, sticking plaster approach, which this legislation seeks to address. Public bodies, through this legislation, are obliged to think about future trends and think about the long term. So we know, we're not doing a good job of much of this work. Some people will say, we can't predict the future, so why are we trying to focus on the future? Well, this is not about being Mystic Meg and predicting the future. This is about using the data and the information that we have to project into the future, and using that data to be able to take the right decisions both today and for tomorrow. So public bodies are obliged through the legislation to consider future trends facing our society, our country, in developing their long-term corporate plans and their strategies. And I give you, some examples of that on the board there. Again, these are the World Economic Forum's long-term global risks that they put together. And it's this type of data which is informing the work of public bodies in Wales to guide what they should be focusing on for the long term. And when I come to my Cymru Can strategy and the involvement in consultation exercise that we undertook, you will see how these risks and the trends that I showed on the previous slide are embodied or encapsulated or become a central point for the strategy that I put together. I guess, a lot of that will not, of course, be a surprise to you, but it's this kind of long-term data, this long-term thinking that public bodies are being asked to consider. And this is why we've got our Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. I don't know if these are actual quotes, but these are the types of things that we will, be hearing, as I've talked about, around, what the pushback for this agenda is. It's a particularly challenging time, I think, when public finances are in a really difficult state. But this is a framework for taking decisions, the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. It's a way of considering how we do things. It doesn't always need to cost more. It's about having that long-term approach and that long-term perspective whilst we're taking our decisions. So it's a way of governing, a way of thinking that public bodies are being asked to consider. Right, let me, hopefully, that's very clear why we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. There was a national conversation called the Wales We Want, which really guided the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It's the latest iteration in our sustainable development journey in Wales. We had a duty around sustainable development within the Assembly as it was then, right from the beginning. And this is the latest iteration of how we're embedding sustainable development in our policy making, in our governing of Wales. And as a result of the Wales We Want, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act came into place back in 2015. I think that's put the legislation, in my view, on really firm foundations. And we're starting to see people and communities taking the legislation, into their own hands. So the duties are on public bodies. Often, people, me doing this role, Sophie doing the job before me, are seeing as the embodiment of this legislation. But actually, I feel like it's starting to bite, because we talk to people about putting the legislation in place, and now you see increasingly community groups, individuals challenging their public bodies and asking them or saying to them, we don't believe this decision is being taken in line with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and asking for change. And that is that is how we're going to see substantial change here. It's not just relying on me to challenge public bodies and advise them. It's not just the expectations on public bodies. It's when the people of Wales are owning this legislation, seeing it as their legislation and asking for change when they see it not being implemented. And I do, obviously we'd love to see more of that happening, but we are seeing a fair amount of that happening right across Wales, which is great to see. Right, so these are the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act goals. There are 7 wellbeing goals, and they're mapped across to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Public bodies are obliged to deliver against these wellbeing goals. They're not a pick and mix. They're not meant to just look at 1 or 2 that they're most interested in. They're meant to look at it in an integrated way and understand how all of their work can be delivered to meet these goals that we have as a country. Each year, there's a status report produced about how well we're doing in delivering against the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And I suspect very few of you have read it. It's called the Wellbeing of Wales Report. Who's read it? There's a few people read it, yeah. Okay, a few of you. All right, this is a different audience than I'm perhaps normally speaking to. But actually, I think it's a really decent report. It's a State of the Nation report each September that tells us how we're doing as a country. It's produced by Welsh Government civil servants, senior civil servants. It's not signed off by ministers, so it's not, directed to tell a positive story if it isn't. But actually, I don't think we're making enough of that information. It tells us how well we're doing. It should be telling us, it tells us how poorly we're doing in some areas. It should be telling us and being used to change direction and change course where we're not making an impact. But it isn't getting the attention it deserves. And this is something that I will be giving attention to when it gets published next year in September, and hopefully amplifying its findings to a wider audience. So that's the well-being. Those are the goals, and they're interested in themselves. I won't go through them in detail, but the Prosperous Wales goal is perhaps the one that's closely linked to the economy. It doesn't talk about GDP in there, which is interesting. It takes a broader approach to economic success. But as I say, all of these should be seen together and considered together when being taken forward. And forgive me for those of you who know this stuff as well, but it has 5 ways of working. And this is how we expect public bodies to deliver on these goals. They're expected to evidence how they deliver, how they are acting on the 5 ways of working. And I think the theory is if you do this stuff, you get to the results, you get to the goals. And so just to explain, some of it needs no explanation. It's about thinking about prevention. It's thinking long term, as I've said. It's involving people, the people who we are delivering services to, in the decisions that affect them. And the recent constitutional report produced by Laura McAllister and others indicated that we're not seeing this significant change in involvement across public bodies as a result of this legislation. Integration is about doing all of these things together. So it's not thinking in terms of silos. It's not just thinking in terms of health or just in terms of economy, but it's looking at making sure these agendas are connected. We know if you think about our health outcomes, 13% of our health outcomes are dependent on the NHS. The rest is around the environment, the economy, our relationships and society. So if we're going to achieve our outcomes, we need to achieve these in an integrated way and think about them in an integrated way. And collaboration is about, for the public bodies, to work together. So I won't go into all the processes that enable that, but There are public service boards on a regional and a local footprint that bring the public bodies together to develop joint plans to address this long-term agenda. We have a lot of public bodies in Wales. I think it's fair to say there will be 56 public bodies falling under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I know, it's crazy, Robert, isn't it? So from the end of June, we will have 56 public bodies falling under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. For a country of 3 million, that is crazy. But there's no big important, there's none of the politicians are talking about harmonising or bringing that together at the moment. And so this agenda is effectively about bringing them together to work effectively as the independent institutions that they are. So onto my strategy. How long have I been talking for? 20 minutes. Okay, so I need to speed up. So onto my strategy. So I'm the second Future Generations Commissioner. Someone said to me, it's a difficult second album, and I sort of feel that in this role, because the first first period was about setting things up, producing advice, raising awareness, and a good job was done in those first 7 years. But this has to be about implementation. This has to be showing how we're making a difference through this legislation. And so I did a long involvement exercise, and you would expect me to be modeling the 5 ways of working, and I think we did, Alice, didn't we, in terms of how we undertook that process. And because everything is in scope of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, we are forced to focus on particular areas. And we've spoken to people and looked at the analysis and looked at what public bodies are doing. And these are the 5 areas of focus that we will have going forward. So they're called 5 missions. Every organisation seems to have missions at the moment, and we're no different. And our missions are illustrated on the board. I'll explain a little bit about why we've come to each mission. The middle mission is about implementation and impact. Sorry, that's just in Welsh now, in the middle. But the middle one is about implementation and impact. So it's making the machinery of all this work more effectively. Good wellbeing objectives, good understanding and monitoring of progress, quality wellbeing assessments, better collaboration at the PSB level, that sort of thing. And then around that, there are more thematic mission areas that we're taking forward. One is on climate change and nature, ensuring the public sector delivers on the targets that it has and supporting them to do so. Another is on culture in the Welsh language. When we did an analysis of public bodies and their approach to delivering on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, culture in the Welsh language was nearly bottom of the pile in terms of the goals that they were giving attention to. And we think it's important that that is given as equal status as the other goals. It's important, for cultural well-being, for our well-being as a country. It's one of the 4 dimensions of well-being that we have in the legislation. But also, this is a movement for change, this agenda, isn't it? And if we're going to engage the people of Wales in this agenda, we need to harness our culture to be able to do that effectively. There's one on health, and so health prevention, having a better focus on health prevention. I was disappointed in Welsh Government's budget announcement recently, which is a really challenging budget for them. I don't disagree, but there was evidence to show that budgets on health prevention were cut more than other budgets, so they weren't protected in the same way. So that is going to store up problems for the future. And we know the situation in Wales in terms of some of our health statistics are worse than many parts of the UK. So I think our diabetes levels and our obesity levels are worse than any other parts of the UK. And if we don't get ahead of that kind of agenda, it will get ahead of us. Our health minister is on record of saying the NHS in its current form will be unsustainable if we don't get ahead of these long-term trends. So that's all about health prevention, and that's all about thinking long-term, and we need to do a better job of it because we're falling behind, not getting ahead. And then the last area, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about, is about the economy. So in the previous 7 years, we perhaps didn't give as much attention to economic well-being as that I'm intending to over the next 7 years. And so this, the well-being economy agenda, as we're calling it, will be a mission area for us over the next few years. Right, I'm going to speed up a bit because I'm taking too much time in talking. But as well as having these 5 missions, we've cheated a bit and we've got 2 areas of focus. One is on food because it covers all of the missions, and it's very timely that we're focusing on food given the farming protests that are going on. But it's clear to me, and it's clear to all of the people, many of the people we spoke to, that we don't have a long-term plan for food. And actually, in terms of food farming, we're going in perhaps the wrong direction in many areas. We're not resilient to producing the right food for our country. We're causing damage to our environment. As I've said, our health is getting worse, and we're eating the wrong foods, etc., etc. So there's a system issue around food or food systems that we're giving some attention to, which is very timely. And then AI and digital is another area of focus, whereby a sense that public bodies need support to be thinking long term about how AI can improve services to citizens for the long term, and making sure that we are ahead of the game. Scotland published a strategy on AI 5 years ago. We're yet to have one in Wales. So again, it's an area where we're a bit behind. So if you look at the economy area, let's just move on to how we are thinking about working with businesses. This is our theory of change for the wellbeing economy. Well, you can read a lot of this for yourselves, but it's about engaging with the business community far more than we've done previously. So I talked to you about the fact that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act just applies to public bodies. Well, we're seeing a significant amount of interest from private businesses in this agenda. So how do we harness that for good effect to achieve the goals that we have as a country? Those goals, the 7 wellbeing goals, they apply to the public sector because of devolution. It would have been difficult or impossible for the Welsh Government with its powers to apply it to the third sector or the private sector. But if we're going to achieve them, it requires all sectors to be on this journey together. So this is my theory of change around the wellbeing economy mission. And there we are in Welsh. This is how we've been thinking about it. So we have recognised that businesses do want to come on board with this agenda, and public bodies need to do more effectively to engage with the business community to support them to understand the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I think there's 2 principal areas where businesses are interested in this. They're interested because if they're delivering public sector contracts, and you tell me if this is different, but if they're delivering public sector contracts, they're being asked to demonstrate social value or community benefits or whatever it might be. And increasingly, that is being framed around the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So businesses want to understand how they can apply it and demonstrate it as a competitive, as part of competing for contracts. And so we've got a job to do to help them with that. But there's also the CSR, ESG agenda. What we're hearing from these businesses is this all makes sense. This is a coherent narrative, a Welsh way of doing CSR. And they are keen to frame their CSR approaches, their ESG approaches, as part of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and want support to be able to do that. So I've said some of this stuff very much to say I feel like we're pushing at an open door. Businesses are knocking on our door wanting to work with us, and we need to develop a better offer for them to support them to engage with this agenda. But that slide says many of the things I've just already said. And so here are some of the large companies that are already engaging with us. I think Oggy are represented here today. They were on the list. There we are in the bubble hat. You might want to say something later about what this means to you as a business and why you've gone forward with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and applied it to your company. But there are many, many more examples other than these on the board where big businesses, small businesses are getting this approach and applying it within their businesses. Principality have a community fund. They fund projects in communities right across Wales, and it's called the Future Generations Fund. And they judge the success of that fund based on its delivery against the wellbeing goals. So, more of that, please. It's great to see that Welsh approach and businesses getting on board. We will produce a toolkit for SMEs to start to address this. It's already been produced, but the gods of Business Wales website mean we're struggling to find the time slot to publish it on the website. But hopefully we will get a pathway to doing that soon. But this is our first start in supporting our SMEs to understand what the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act means for them and how they might apply it. I know a toolkit is not the be all and end all. Just because we produce this toolkit, it's going to mean that it happens, but it's our starting point and a first place for businesses to go to understand the Act, what it means for business and how it applies to them. We're hoping to launch that in the summer. And I think this is my final slide, Alice, just to give you a heads up before I sit down. This would be a really interesting conversation with you because many of you come from businesses. We're keen to understand how we engage with the Welsh business community more broadly. You can see at the bottom, Scotland has a business purpose commission to identify and maximise responsible business actions within the Scottish business sector. And we think, or we're being told, there's a value, there's a wish for us to do more of that with Welsh businesses. So we're keen to do so and to understand how that might work. And you can see on that slide some of the thoughts that we've got about what that might look like in the Welsh context. So so in summary, really keen to work more effectively with the business community right across Wales. Although I said we're going to put more focus on that area in my term, there has already been a lot of great work done by Sophie and team, and particularly by Alice. And we've had a particular spotlight on procurement. Procurement leads you to all the wellbeing goals, and it's been an area where we've given a fair amount of attention. So Alice, can I ask you to come and explain a bit more?
Been given instructions, the microphone needs to be close to my mouth, so we'll see how it goes. Diolch, Derek. I am here just to shine a bit of a light on procurement. As the Commissioner kind of introduced, it's been a real key area of focus for our office over the last sort of 4.5, 5 years, and I've been leading some of that work. Procurement has now found a home in our wellbeing economy mission, and we'll be looking at kind of procurement through the lens of that kind of wider agenda. Our goal here and our hope with shining a light on procurement, and we've published research, 2 of those reports are on the screen, is to ensure that the kind of over £7 billion spent annually by the public sector in Wales delivers the best outcomes against our economic, cultural, environmental and social well-being. And it can deliver those best outcomes for current and future generations. Apologies for the kind of size of the text on this slide, but I wanted to highlight how procurement offers a real opportunity for the public and the private sector to work together to deliver outcomes that are aligned to our shared vision. And just to put a kind of a spotlight on a couple of these outcomes and impacts that we can deliver. Some of these will affect businesses, some of them will affect suppliers. Some of these outcomes we need to deliver collaboratively with the public and the private sector. So the hope is that we can have cohesive communities where social enterprises and small businesses thrive, that we can deliver social value through all of our approaches and outcomes around procurement. And that where public bodies work collaboratively through regional structures, they're able to collaborate and use spend cleverly to prioritise maximising wellbeing. And a resilient Wales here, making sure that we can reduce the use of natural resources, promote a circular economy, that we have a globally responsible Wales, and improve our natural environment, protect the biodiversity. They're just a couple of examples of the kind of impacts we hope to see. And it's not just us, it's not just the Commissioner's Office talking about the importance of procurement, the role it has to play as a lever for change, businesses and the public sector coming together. The legislative landscape is changing and evolving. The Social Partnership and Public Procurement Act is one of those places where contracting authorities, where public bodies will be asking suppliers for more ambitious delivery around socially responsible procurement. We're seeing examples already where local authorities are drafting procurement strategies, making it really clear what they expect for people that they work with. And it's even more important as we're looking to implement this legislation, which is aligned to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. You can see the definition of socially responsible procurement there looks at improving economic, social, environmental and cultural wellbeing, same use of the Sustainable Development Principle. But it's important that businesses are involved in this discussion. The Commissioner Derek's already talked about involvement as one of the ways of working that's being embedded least. And there's a real opportunity here for the public sector to involve key stakeholders in those decisions. There's been a key piece of work, a focus piece of work I've been involved with Welsh Government around moving away from some of the complex terminology that suppliers are asked to understand, whether we're talking about social value or community benefits or well-being, to harmonise some of that, to have a definition that we all want to work towards well-being impacts aligned with our legislation around well-being of future generations. The hope is that this consistent approach aligned to the Act will mean that outcomes are delivered consistently with the economic, social, environmental and cultural wellbeing. I use those words a lot because they're so important. They're at the heart of what we're trying to deliver. And Welsh Government is currently developing some guidance for contracting authorities and suppliers around the kind of measurement and reporting requirements. A few examples of those about the amount of businesses supporting employees to learn Welsh or improve their Welsh, around carbon reduction plans and carbon literacy training, as well as employers that pay the real living wage and provide equality, diversity and inclusion training. So this is currently in draft and it's still ongoing, but I think it's encouraging to see this join up of approaches and more consistency, bringing the public and private sector together in the space of commercial activity. I wanted to share lastly some of our monitoring and assessing, some of our understanding of where progress is being made in this space. And one of the tools that we use to assess progress made by the public sector on implementing the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and to understand their priorities, understand what's important to the communities of Wales, is where councils and other public bodies are setting their wellbeing objectives and steps. It's been encouraging over the last few years to see an increased focus on procurement in these objectives. This is the kind of signal that public bodies send to say, this is what we're working on. And the steps add another level of detail to that. The steps are kind of what they intend to do to meet those objectives. And it's likely that these areas of focus, these ambitions, are going to be kind of translated to the asks on suppliers as well. So you can see we're seeing more of a focus in their objectives and steps around ensuring carbon reduction plans are considered, a focus on local employment, local supply chains, and terminology aligned to our legislation around the Sustainable Development Principle. Now, we've also looked at how public bodies are making progress in implementing the recommendations in our Future Generations Report 2020. This is kind of the key document where we summarise progress being made on the Act and set out recommendations that public sector should take in setting their objectives. Now, in 2022, there were 189 objectives and 1,759 steps set out by public bodies. So there's a huge amount of detail. And through our assessment of this, we've found that there are only 4%, 78 steps that include working with others to support the development of skills for the future. There's a real opportunity here for private sector and the public sector to be working together in this space, whether it's skills around farming and agriculture or AI or health, to name a few. We've also found that there are only 24 steps, 1.36% of steps around fair work practices. Now, this is increasingly important with the social partnership and public procurement bill that I've mentioned. It's also important that we're considering fair work not only in Wales, but through our global supply chains as well. And then lastly, there were only 41 steps, so 2.3% of steps around procuring in a way that supports the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being. And I've gone on about those 4 words a lot. They're really important. And these are areas where we hope to see progress. We hope to see public bodies involving the private sector more, and the private sector calling public bodies out where there are opportunities that aren't being maximised. And so part of our work around the wellbeing economy, as well as some of our other key areas, is to work in partnership with other organisations to support regional economic partnerships around their wellbeing, around our wellbeing economy mission, to see more progress in this space. That's it from me. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Alice.
So I think it's over to you. Questions for our 2 wonderful speakers. Thank you so much. Any questions in the room? Yes, at the back there.
Hi, I'm Tilly Ashton. I'm a sustainability coordinator working for Seven Screen. We're an independent production company based in Cardiff, and we make everything from feature films for the likes of Netflix and through to BBC, S4C and so on, a TV series. So things like Craith, Hidden, obviously, which was bilingual as well. So we're very committed to Welsh language programming as well. My question is, I also work for BAFTA Albert, and as you may all know, there's now a requirement for all productions in the UK to take measures to lower their carbon impact during the shoot and also to map their carbon footprint, which is brilliant, very much the work I'm involved with day to day and that Seven Screen is committed to. But the problem we have, the challenge, I should say, is that there's a disconnect between mandated actions required and our ability to finance those actions, some of which are quick wins and cost effective, but others, for example, hiring battery generators, just to give you one example, those are more expensive. And I would be really interested to hear whether you think there might be any potential for financing to get involved here, Welsh Government financing potentially, maybe through tax incentives or conditions of financial incentives for production specifically, to then ring fence a portion of that spend to go towards sustainable actions on the ground. It would really enable us to scale up quite dramatically the actions that we're able to take on production. Thank you.
They come back straight away. I don't know anything specifically about finance available for production companies, but we will take that away because, you know, part of our job is to create this ecosystem so it's all working together so that the Development Bank, Welsh Government, local authorities are enabling other parts of our ecosystem and society to find the finance or the advice or whatever it might be in order to take action. So we tend not to, because we're just a small team, we tend not to get involved in too much detailed program advice or delivery of projects and so forth. But it is exactly the type of thing that this legislation is there to encourage public bodies to deliver on. One of the things I would though flag that we have been pushing, which is not specifically around finance, it's around reducing carbon emissions. It's a framework called Race to Zero, and which we hopefully would help in this space. Others are involved in this too. So Race to Zero is a UN framework for taking action to reduce carbon emissions. Currently, our public bodies have an obligation to look at their own carbon emissions, but what the Race to Zero framework does is ask for an area-based approach, led by public bodies, but in something that is a framework that private and third sector organisations can be part of as well. And I think by applying that Race to Zero framework, hopefully we can be the first Race to Zero country that where it covers all parts of Wales. We have a framework where that more integrated approach to this agenda is achieved through finance in other ways rather than separately. So sorry, that's not a direct answer to your question, but perhaps we can go and take that away, Tilly. But that is part of the ecosystem, that we're seeking to create that would make more of that happen. So thank you.
Thanks. I think we have a question online.
We have a question online from Mark Lang. Mark, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Good morning. Hello, Derek and Alice. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. As you know, Derek, I've been a long-standing supporter of the Act and have followed its progress and been involved in some ways. And it's reassuring and refreshing to see such a strong focus on the economy, and particularly the wellbeing economy, and indeed on Welsh businesses. But could I ask whether or not you believe the absence of private sector representation on the public service boards represents one of the core governance faults of the Act, and actually, in a sense, makes the delivery of the wellbeing economy much more difficult than it ought to be? If businesses are being asked to do something, that's one thing. If they're being involved, to use the terminology of the 5 ways of working, in decision making, surely that's better.
Hi, Mark. Yes, I guess that is correct. The public service boards. Shall I just explain a little bit about public service boards? Because so public service boards bring together, as I was mentioning in my presentation, public bodies to act together on this long-term agenda. They're not meant to be a place where they all come together, tell each other what they're doing on their own, and then go home again. They're there to come together to put together an integrated agenda to deliver on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. There is a mixed picture in terms of how those bodies are working. There are 13 of them at the moment, so some of them have merged. I think each county would have had one. Now we've got 13. At the moment, there are a few statutory representatives on there, and others can be invited to attend. I think to answer your question, Mark, I think there is a strong case for that. I guess it also depends on the agenda that the public service boards are looking at. So others will say the same. The police commissioners will say, we need a seat at the table of these bodies because we need to be part of this. And they could get a point where you get so many different representatives that it becomes unmanageable. But I recognise that there is a big gap around business. The current approach is, depending on the issues that public service board is considering, they can involve a wider range of partners, including business, and they can invite them to attend, but they might not do so if they feel that this agenda shouldn't involve them or doesn't involve them, but potentially. So there is, I think, the flexibility to allow that, Mark. It's not statutory, but I think it is also one of the things that we should be sort of facing up in the air to speak to Mark. I'm assuming he's on that screen. I just realised what I'm doing. Speaking to God.
Big Brother's watching you.
There's the camera there. Sorry. Hi, Mark. And so there is going to be a post-legislative review, Mark. That's being scoped at the moment. To this extent, the size and scale of that, I'm not sure at the moment because it's within Welsh Government. But that is an opportunity to review this legislation and make improvements to it. I think everyone would agree. There are bits that we've learned that we would want to change as part of the legislation, and how the PSBs work and their membership would be potentially one of those areas that we could look at. But there is flexibility at the moment for public service boards to bring on business should they want to do so.
Thank you very much.
Yes, of course you can.
I just wanted to briefly add that the PSBs are one place where regional collaboration is happening. They're not always the only place. PSBs they don't have a lot of finance generally. They are made up of members that are really championing the act. They're really championing kind of development in their regions and in their communities. We quite often see the objectives for the PSBs are around community involvement, inequalities, decarbonisation. And there is another regional network recently established, the corporate joint committees. And these have more budget, they have more funding. There is overlap of the membership, but we're seeing examples of strategies and a real focus on the economy here because their focus is on transport and infrastructure. I'm also kind of anecdotally working with the public services boards and assessing their practices. You're seeing examples of, because the small local businesses, sometimes community-owned businesses, are plugged into those networks. So there are examples of individual projects where the PSBs are involving local businesses, even though they're not necessarily invited members to be formally part of the PSB. So I would welcome more of that kind of practice happening.
That's a good point.
That's really helpful. Another question in the room. I think I saw your hand go up earlier.
Hi, thank you. I'm Barbara Davis. I'm Deputy Director at Size of Wales. We're a Welsh climate change charity that help protect tropical forests the size of Wales around the world. And we know that our global supply chains here in Wales are driving some of this deforestation overseas through the things that we buy, such as palm oil, soy, beef, coffee, and cacao, and also through not just products, commodities, but also our investments, our pension funds, etc. And obviously, public sector bodies have a role to play, but equally businesses. We know that action needs to be taken to look at our global supply chains. We are real fans of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, particularly the globally responsible nation goal, which does require everyone to look at global supply chains and make sure we're using the resources in a fair way. So what support can we be giving businesses to look at quite a complex issue of global supply chains, and how can we ensure that the focus, I mean, rightly so, let's look at Wales, but we do need to be ensuring that we're not offshoring our carbon emissions, potential human rights abuses, such as displacing indigenous communities from their land to grow soy for Welsh farming, for example. So how can we work together on this issue to also work with businesses? And just to shamelessly plug that on the 9th of April, we will be doing an event with Canol Cymru and Orchard Media on some businesses that have already taken action to look at their supply chain. So really invite anyone else that is interested in this topic to attend. Thank you.
Alice, would you like to respond? Or?
I'll go for, it's a great question. I mean, I think our analysis says when we looked at wellbeing objectives, the globally responsible Wales one is at the bottom in terms of the attention that it's given by the Welsh public bodies. I'm right in saying that. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and so there's certainly a job to do. But in terms of our support to businesses, well, that's what we intend to do. I think, give more advice and support to businesses about what we expect them to be doing. We're going to need help in terms of how we do that and the advice that we provide, but the toolkit is a starting point. So this could be part of that. But I think the food, I'm making an announcement today actually in response to the SFS consultation and so forth. And one of the points that we're making on that is around a long-term plan for food in this country. And I know what we've heard is that businesses and other sectors want a clear direction of where we're going in terms of our food system. The current trajectories are in the wrong direction, so we need a new sense of where we're going, and that also has got to include, where we where we source our food from globally and the impact that that has. And that will require significant shifts potentially in, where we source our food, what we produce, what we eat, what businesses we give grants to. All of that is going to require change. But at the moment, it's, in my view, disconnected and disjointed. So we're perhaps giving grants to business over there that are, creating jobs, but perhaps damaging our rivers. And, we're supporting retail, fast food retail outlets near our schools. And then we're having to deal with, obesity levels for, 5-year-olds that are some of the highest in the world. It's crazy that the, different parts of the system are doing different things, potentially for the right reason or for historical reasons. But as a whole, it's just creating a complete mess, and we're going in the wrong way. It's going to, I'm sorry to go off on a bit of a tangent. This is big change, isn't it? And a lot of people will be concerned about that change, but we've got to find better ways of bringing people with us on these big change agendas, engaging with the communities affected, the businesses affected, to understand, how we can support them to transition to where we need to go to enable our businesses to thrive. But often businesses will say to government and others, they need a sense of direction. Where is the North Star? Where do you want us to invest, and where do you want us to go? And I think in the food system, we lack that in the UK, and we lack that in Wales. And there's an opportunity for us in Wales to address some of that.
I think there's one last question in the room.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Rachel Ashworth from Cardiff Business School. It's just a question, Derek, about how we as education institutions can support those economy wellbeing goals. And I mean, we're trying hard at the business school with our sort of public value agenda, but there are gaps. There is more that we can do. So, how do you see us being able to contribute, whether that's in terms of our core sort of undergraduate, postgraduate education, or whether that's in terms of executive education and development support, convening support for business organisations?
Yeah, great question. And I think this is something we're looking at the moment. I think what we get a lot of interest from HE and FE institutions in Wales to work with us, and we can't resource it all. So we are doing a consultation now with HE and FE to put together a strategic joint program that meets your agenda, but also meets our agenda, because it's been a bit piecemeal and a bit, opportunistic, I guess, and sometimes not strategic. And so we've got 3 headings for that program of work. It's around, what areas of research can we consider? There are areas around futures thinking and futures foresight, around the capacity to do so in our public sector, a sense that we're asking our public bodies to think long term, but we're not skilling them up to be able to apply these kind of models that you can use to do long-term planning and put corporate plans together in that way. And then there is more implementation measures, and there's a variety of those areas. What skills can we provide to our public bodies in other areas to help them to deliver? What do civic missions look like? What are we using as measures of success for all of this? So I think we're open to hearing from the HE sector about what that looks like. It's felt a bit random up until now. There's been some great stuff done, but we've been able to engage perhaps with Cardiff, but not with Bangor and Aberystwyth. And we want to have an all Wales strategic approach. So that programme is called Adwaith, and we are hoping to get that signed off in the next few months. So we will have a shared programme of work for HE and FE as well as ourselves to deliver on this agenda.
If I may, I'm conscious of time, but just to add to that, from a public services, a public bodies perspective, a lot of my time is spent understanding some of the challenges felt in public bodies. And one of them is about getting people in to work and to stay, both in Wales, but also in the public sector. I went to Cardiff Business School. I had a fantastic experience here, and it was because of being at the business school and the connections that I met that I thought, I want to stay in Wales. And I heard about the Commissioner's Office and thought, this is amazing. And I did a joint piece of work between Cardiff Uni and the Commissioner's Office. But from speaking to the public bodies, they are unsure as how to attract young graduates, young people within Wales to stay. So I think, as well as the research pieces and the stuff about university being having a civic mission, which is really important, it's also about remembering that the people that are studying in these institutions are hopefully going to be the next generations of leaders in Wales. So understanding how do we encourage young people that might not have been born in Wales, might not have never heard about the Future Generations Act, but to feel a sense of wanting to stay and do things for Wales and for their communities as well. I think that fostering that feeling is important.
I think that's the end of our session. I wanted to just add a couple of things around this because we've been lucky enough to have a wonderful new Vice Chancellor who has placed the climate emergency and sustainability at the heart of everything we're going to be doing as an institution going forward. I'm the Education for Sustainable Development lead in the university, and that's why I was sort of invited to chair this today. And I think actually this final bit, thank you very much for segueing into the idea that we are seeking to ensure that all of our students come out of this institution having engaged with real live projects, having understood what the challenges are around sustainability, having understood the Future Generations Act and what it means to them personally and within their academic disciplines. And one of the challenges that we have is actually to find those real life problems for our students to engage with. It was delightful to hear that you'd had the opportunity to work within your programme on those sorts of things. It would be great to make sure that we have that front door to you as businesses so that we can find those problems. We can place our students with you to try to think about and explore the challenges that you've got. I mean, Tilly, maybe, a final year project on exploring that would be wonderful for both you and for the students. So I think those sorts of opportunities are really what we would love to see happening. And I think that maybe ought to be part of that strategic mission for the HE and FE sector in the university. I mean, we think living labs of our own institution, living labs of the city, living labs of Wales. We can go global on that as well as opportunity. Right. So I hope that you share with me the enthusiasm for this, for the work that Derek and Alice have been telling us about. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
And I just, on top of that, also pass on our thanks on behalf of the business school. Thanks in terms of the presentation. We're very grateful that you've brought your thoughts, your objectives, and you've shared them with our audience here in the school. It's great that you've been able to choose this forum to do that. Also, Julie, thank you so much for chairing the Q&A and the introductions as well. Big thank you to you all for joining. We don't often overrun. I don't often let things overrun, but we have by 10 minutes because I think there was so much that we needed to share this morning. So it was important to try and squeeze in as many questions as we could. Thanks so much for joining. Diolch yn fawr iawn am cwmni chi eto bore yma. Gobeithio'n fawr fyddwn ni'ch gweld chi mis nesaf. I hope we'll see you next month. But until then, have a great day and we'll see you soon. Bye.